Google's taking a little while. There it goes. All right. Pull up my note about the Tale of Genji. Okay. Gonna make the post about the new book. Here we go. Come on. Why is this website so slow? Okay, anyway.
Is your computer broken?
No, NK Jemisin's website is actually really slow.
Okay.
I want to link to her website and not the Amazon link.
Yeah. I'm going to remove all that kind of stuff from the site.
Yep. Doesn't make enough money to be worth the effort.
I mean, it's weird that I basically, I keep getting emails from Amazon Associates account stuff, right? And they're like, we got new rules, we got new policies. None of them apply to us, really.
Yeah.
But like, we're also not following all the rules and policies. Like, you're supposed to like put big notices up, like, I am using Amazon affiliate links and shit.
Yeah.
We're not doing, it's like sometimes, just because, not because I'm trying to make money, but because I don't make any money off it really.
Mm-hmm.
But like if you have the Amazon Associates thing attached to your Amazon account, at the top of Amazon is this handy toolbar that for copying links to products. So I'll just use it because it's handy, but it happens to be an affiliate link.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas if you try to get a link to a product, normally it's like you got to go to your location bar and chop off all the garbage, right? And you get a longer link that way, and this use URL shortener. But anyway, so technically they should be closing our account, but I guess we're so small that we're beneath the notice of even the account closing bot. And I'm like, why even bother? I'd rather just close this associate's account than,
Yep. Well, that's the thing with anything creative. Making a small amount of money is worse than making no money or a lot of money.
No, because you're doing, it depends. If you make a small amount of money for absolutely no work, then it's okay.
Yeah. But like I have to, every year in my taxes, I have to submit royalties, which means I need a more expensive TurboTax to handle all that because of the t-shirts and things that people occasionally buy on Amazon. I got a task. One of my shit talk items is working on new merch.
Yeah, I mean, I give my tax ID, social security number to all the things that need it, right? Like the associates program and some other things. Right?
I pay taxes on the Patreon. I pay taxes on the Google ads. I pay taxes on all that.
When I file my taxes, I don't type in any of those income sources.
Well, we're live, so you just get admitted to tax fraud live on the air. Yeah, I do type it in, but a lot of that you can put in under like miscellaneous income.
Also, I used to file in all those other states when I got like checks for enforcing, and then some enforcer told me like if you don't make more than like X dollars in the state, don't even bother. And I file anyway in those states. Granted, I haven't enforced in a while, so I don't have to. All right, well, but I did it 1 year. I just didn't file. Nothing happened.
All right. I will continue to file.
I mean, I still included that income on my New York.
Also, I got the last time we enforced, I got a refund from Massachusetts of like 40 cents.
Right, but it's like, I basically don't make back the money it costs to file there.
Nah. Well, I already pay for like the max of, I pay for like the big TurboTax with all the extra nonsense.
I just pay for the cheapest. I can't use, they won't let me use the free one. I use the cheapest, not free one.
I use I think I use the second most expensive one. I do have a CPA that looks at some stuff, and my taxes are a little bit complicated. Partly because all this GeekNights stuff that's on my account.
Stop doing that shit.
Yeah. All right. Anyway,
I should do taxes. It's already February.
I know. Usually I do them in January. I'm very Ned Flanders about my taxes.
I do them at the last second.
Last time I did them at the last possible second. Like I literally filed them.
Why would you do it? I mean,
I do it early because I almost always owe a lot, and the penalty is higher the longer you wait.
Well, so the logic should be if you're expecting a refund, you should do it earlier to get your money sooner.
Yep.
And if you're expecting to pay, you should do it the last second.
Nope, because if you owe more than a certain amount, they charge you basically interest based on how much you owed
Don't
how many.
owe that much. If you
I
owe
often owe that
you
much.
already fucked up.
I often owe that much, partly because even with zero withholdings and paying extra due to the tax changes that happened under the former guy, I still owe because I don't have a mortgage or anything.
I think I'm gonna see about the shenanigans of trying to buy a bond. Right, with
It's easy. We'll see.
you have to have a refund. The thing is, you have to have a refund big enough, right? You can't just buy it with money. You have to buy it with your refund. So if your refund's not big enough, there's a way where you can basically just pay some taxes and then you get the money back. You just give the government a short loan.
The other way to go is just buy bonds directly. Like if you're going to do that.
A limit. You're basically doing this trick lets you go over the limit. That's the reason to do it.
If you have enough money to go over the limit, you should be investing in something other than bonds.
But the inflation bond just happens to be a really good deal at this moment.
Oh yeah, but there are other better deals.
But they're not guaranteed deals.
They're guaranteed enough. Anyway.
They're not 100, but this is 100% guaranteed. It's hard to beat that.
Anyway, this is not investment advice. I am not a registered investment advisor, nor is Scott.
Nor am I. But if I go to a casino and a slot machine has a guaranteed, not a trick, absolutely for real, 100% chance jackpot when you pull the lever, I'm going to pull that lever. It's like, there might be some other slot machines that don't have 100% odds, that have better payouts 90% of the time, 80% of the time, something like that. But I can go to those slot machines and the guaranteed slot machine. Why wouldn't I go to the guaranteed slot machine, right?
It's mostly around the opportunity cost of if things change and that money's locked up in a bond. But anyway.
That's true. You gotta wait next years before you.
Yeah, but I listed all my investments right now, and my biggest one is cash because of the troubles. So gotta do something about that.
The bond is a better investment than cash.
Oh yeah, the cash was a temporary thing. I gotta convert that cash into non-cash now. Maybe soon. Market's way down because of the Ukraine crisis.
The bond to just be inflation-proof cash. So.
Unless inflation rises more and is worse than the bond and a better bond comes out.
Well, no, that's the thing is the I bond always matches inflation. You never lose on inflation.
Unless...
No matter what.
Unless the inflation is irregular and it depends if the consumer price index changes separately from inflation. Inflation has a very specific definition. Prices and money could become less valuable for reasons other than pure inflation that wouldn't be accounted for.
The only thing that could really mess you up is if Congress passed a law changing the way the bond works in mid-bond.
Or if prices go up for reasons that don't count as inflation, depending on how inflation... Like, there's shenanigans that can happen, is all I'm saying.
See, it's very unlikely.
Also, the amount of money that you and I have, that none of those differences matter to us.
But, right. Also, no matter how rich you are, even if you do all the shenanigans, you can only buy $15,000 of this bond per year, no matter what. Even Bill Gates can't buy more than that. So
if you want to buy more than that, you should be investing in a more complex instrument.
That's what I'm saying, is that it's like you go to the casino, and it's like, sure, you're mostly going to be spending your time on other things, but they let you pull the guaranteed slot machine once. It's like, well, every time I visit the casino, I pull the guaranteed slot machine once.
But there's other things you can look at, like municipal bonds and things that are still guaranteed.
But that's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
You can't just go on like E-Trade or your bank and click and be like, buy a bond in the bridge they're building. It doesn't work like that.
All right. It's Thursday, February 17th, 2022. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geek Nights. Tonight, we are talking about, for the second time, the Tale of Genji. I'm sure we might reference it off and on in the future. It's part of the lexicon of things I've read that I have thoughts on. But if you missed it, the Tale of Genji was the GeekNights Book Club. We talked at length about why it took so long to read it. It wasn't just because we were slow. There was a lot of other things going on.
2.5 years we spent on this one book.
Yep.
Now, in the past 2 months, I've read 1.9 books that aren't the Tale of Genji.
Yep. But we already did an episode talking about the plot, the story, Genji himself, like our reactions to it just as a novel. And because that took over an hour, and we spent 2 years in this liminal space of not reading the Tale of Genji. And many of you have read it, at least I hope you have. There are only 2 people watching this live stream, so I can see the relative interest in the second Genji episode compared to other topics. But
that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
If I'm going to spend 2.5 years reading a book,
You're going to spend 2.5 years hearing about it.
I'm going to spend 2 podcasts talking about it, at least. Right?
But this episode is a combination of all the things we wanted to say that we couldn't get out because, we talked for over an hour in episode 1. We were tired and hungry. But 2, the meta, like the things around the book that aren't just the story itself. Because we had an hour of just
more interesting than the book, right? Because if this hadn't been the first novel written a long ass time ago in Japan, and if this, if a book like this was written just a couple hundred years ago, right?
Kind of trashy romance story.
Would be, and there was some other novel that was the first novel. This book would be, not studied by scholars, not remembered, not, significant really.
Yep. Well, the end of the book even mentions other works that are referenced or mentioned in the Tale of Genji that are real close to being novels, but don't quite make it. And there's a reason.
Sure. I tried to research what counts as a novel, and basically it just.
Oh, you want to find a community of people who have different opinions on what that means?
Sure. It's like there isn't actually a complete agreement that this is the first novel, but I didn't really see any. It's like there was an agreement that I couldn't find people saying that this is definitely the first novel, 100%. But I didn't see anyone referring to anything else as a potential first novel, right?
Noun.
It's like the only nominee. It doesn't get a unanimous vote, but there aren't any other nominees. So that's
novel, a fictitious prose narrative of book length, typically.
Is that what Wikipedia says?
That's just the dictionary definition from Oxford Languages, it looks like.
Okay.
A fictitious prose narrative of book length, typically representing character and action with some degree of realism.
Some degree of okay.
Comes from Italian, French, Latin, Novus.
Sure. But yeah, it's like anything older than this,
which means new, a sense of novelty.
Right. So anything older than this is going to be like, not in, a long prose form, like a poem is not in a long prose form, right?
Or it's a long form
spoken,
that involves
right.
prose, but comes from a non-written literary tradition, like an epic poem.
Spoken tradition or a musical tradition or something, some other sort of, it's like, a movie is not a novel, even though it's a long story about people. It's fictional, right?
Yep.
Because it's not text. So it's like, a short story is not a novel. Why? It's too short. I don't know what the line is between, not because there's some short novels out there, but especially lines get really blurry because like you can have an adult short story, right? Is going to be longer than a kid's novel.
Yeah.
This, whatever. Yeah, we're going to talk about meta stuff, right? I think we should start, which is when I chose this book, like I knew the book existed, but I didn't really know what it was about. I knew it was like a big historical deal, and I figured, this is one of those things that's referenced very often.
Well, like when we read the Odyssey, or we both read a lot of old works. They're very fascinating to read.
Right, but it's, I'm like, this is an old, significant, often referenced work, so therefore I should become knowledgeable about it so that when it's referenced, I get the reference, I have a greater context and understanding of other works, right? Even if I don't, whether or not I enjoy this work or not, which I didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
I keep hearing it come up. If I hear anything come up too often, well, there must be something to it, right? And then, I think I said this before, there was an exhibit about the book at the Met, right? Which I can just take the subway to in a few minutes. And I woke up one morning on a weekend and I saw on Twitter, they're like, yeah, last weekend for the exhibit. And I was like, I'm not fucking doing anything.
Yeah.
Just walk my ass over there. Right. And at that exhibit, I learned many fascinating things that I will now discuss, right? So the first thing is that this book, when it was originally released, was released in separate books. It wasn't one giant book like we read. It was all these chapters were coming out, chapter by, in smaller sections, which really reminded me of when you go to a Japanese bookstore like Kinokuniya and you see that the novels come out in, chapter by chapter. I think one of our earlier book club books was Q-Teen-84, right?
Yep.
And, we read Q-Teen-84, by Murakami, author Murakami, not artist Murakami.
Yeah.
As one giant book, right? But I think if you read Q-Teen-84 in Japan, I don't remember exactly how many. Was it 2 or 4? Or it was some, number of smaller books that came out one at a time.
And that's not unique to Japanese literature. Like The Count of Monte Cristo was just a serial with like a little chapter revealed like every time.
That was in a larger publication though, right?
Yep.
Like you would get like a magazine or something.
It was basically the Shonen Jump of its time. Like, hey, here's a bunch of short stories,
right? Of its time.
Yep.
I think.
But
I'm not 100% sure on that.
As a result, in its time, very few people read that as one big work. They would just read it like, oh yeah, the new Count of Monte Cristo was out in the thing, and I read it. But then when we read it as adults, we read it as this giant book that's like 1,000 pages long that took me a month to read.
Yeah.
It was real good.
So that goes back to what makes a novel. See, I had erroneously thought that something that makes a novel is that it's a chapter book, right? That there are, because a short story is not going to be, if you have 2 chapters, you can't be a short story, right? That just makes sense. So, but if something's got chapters,
I've read short stories that included a like chapter 2.
Maybe, but
but they were still short, like under 50 pages.
My erroneous previous conception was that a novel is a novel. One of the characteristics of a novel is chapters, right?
Well, I guess I would step back.
Doesn't seem to be the case
because the way I've thought about it, and this is not based on any academia. Like this is just how I personally interact with novels. I think of novels as when you've got a relatively consistent story that progresses over the course of the work of sufficient length with an intentional ending of some kind. Like that's kind of the broad area of how I've looked at novels, in that I've read works older than the Tale of Genji. And other than the Odyssey, very few of them had a lot of that intention of like, this story starts here and ends here with a consistent cast-ish of characters and a relative progression of the plot. And while many epic poems have that and do have an intentional ending, like we know how the Odyssey ends, it has a very, like it wraps everything up very neatly, but because it's an epic poem, I always did treat it differently.
Yeah. So anyway, the fact that it came out as these separate books, and actually at the exhibit we saw like, not the earliest, I guess.
Oh, none of those exist. All the originals are lost to time with no exceptions.
Right. These weren't originals like touched by the author, right? But these were, extremely old published editions that, noble people had back hundreds of years ago, and it was several. It was like they had there was like all these books lined up, right? Volume 1, 2, 3, 4, and I could imagine that like at the time it was probably like this this woman would write a volume, right? And then I don't know how they would print it. Was it like woodblock or whatever?
It's a specific style that was popular at the time, the Orihon style, which is a little mini book, but it doesn't open like a normal book. It's basically, imagine one long piece of paper that's alternatingly folded like an accordion.
Oh, okay. But yeah, it's like they would produce enough of those, right? And then they would get disseminated probably, by horse, I guess was the fastest way, right? It's like amongst all the other nobles, right? And they'd be waiting for the next one the way that people today are waiting for like Netflix seasons to drop, right?
So get this. I'm looking at the Wikipedia about Orihon because I don't know a lot about this. Obviously, if you want to know about the real history of the Tale of Genji, go read an expert's website.
I'm not going to, I'm trying to avoid doing the thing where we like read Wikipedia and then just reiterate it, because you can do that yourself, right?
Yep.
I'm only gonna.
This is our reactions to this
that I'm aware of, in my own brain.
But I was skimming it just to see if there's anything interesting, and it points out that this style basically became extremely popular in Japan, largely because of the Tale of Genji. Like, it is noted as one of the earliest popular uses of it, and one of the most popular books to appear in the history of the style was in the 12th century. The Tale of Genji got more and more popular.
So something else, right? So basically, when I was at this exhibit, that was like one of the first things I noticed, right? Was that sort of commonality that we had with these Japanese nobles from centuries ago, right? It's like there was a serial work that they were, it's like, how much leisure did they have? Well, in fact, the Tale of Genji gives us a lot of insight into their leisure.
Yep.
Right?
Case in point, ask an average person, what the fuck is Genji's job? Because
right? It's like they didn't have any movies or video games. It's like they enjoyed life, watching archery competitions, performing theater for each other, playing music with each other. They didn't have concerts to go to. There wasn't like rock stars. They played music, for each other, right? Because it's not like they trained the peasants how to play music,
Yep.
They played Go and other board games, they wrote poetry and had poetry competitions and art competitions. And these were the sorts of things they did for leisure, including reading the Tale of Genji and then talking about it.
Yep.
And it was interesting to see at the exhibit because not only did I see that, but so many of the things were other examples of things that we had in common with, us of today, right? Who we don't consider ourselves to be nobles, but I guess relatively we are.
Oh, absolutely. As we, on our own dime, for the most part, are making a podcast for whoever happens to listen to it because we think it's fun.
Right. It's like how much we had in common with them, not only following serial artworks, right? But I also saw there is like the poetry competitions, right? It's like all throughout Genji, people like communicating to each other with poetry. In the poetry, they're dropping references to things. How often do we just like insert Simpsons references into whatever, right? But if I wrote some book with a Simpsons reference, like Two Knives, right? And someone republishes that in 500-600 years.
There'll be a footnote like, this is a reference.
Put a footnote on that, Two Knives.
This is a reference to Mo Sizlak from a lost animated series we believe was called The Simpsons.
Hopefully they have a cyberspace. They could just insert the clip of Mo going Two Knives. But, right, you get the idea. The same thing. They're constantly dropping references to Chinese poetry and shit in the Tale of Genji. And
well, to the point, there's one chapter that it's one chapter I actually kind of glossed over because the chapter was like dense and I didn't really understand what was going on. When I got to the end of it, I went back and looked at the footnotes and it was very clear that chapter was like unique among all the chapters of the Tale of Genji and that it was almost nothing but references to popular Chinese literature that readers of the Tale of Genji in its context and time would have recognized. So that is like us stumbling into like a bunch of people who are really into, I don't know, Twilight fandom, and we have no idea what the fuck they're talking about.
Yeah. So it goes even further, right? So this poetry nonsense, I got the feeling that it was a lot like today where you see like a sports anime come out and that sport gets popular. Right? I'm not sure chicken and egg what came first, but there were a lot of things at that exhibit about poetry competitions and people flinging poetry at each other. And it was clear that like that's something that they were doing. And I don't know if it was, the Tale of Genji like got people interested in flinging poetry at each other, or they already were and it sort of made it more popular, or right?
Well, there's contemporary like current things that have like we've seen this happen where something is depicted in media, people get interested in it, even though it was a thing. It becomes more popularized and more people make it a thing or start doing it. And it's like hackers did some of that with like hacking culture, but War Game really did that because that movie, war dialing, was extremely unknown and not common. I don't know. I want to even say that war dialing was not an agreed upon term before that movie. But after that movie, a million kids, including me, like got really into hacking and learned about it because of the movie. But then that fed into this mythos around hacking to where people didn't realize how popular that movie made it specifically, yet watched that movie and thought, oh yeah, this is describing the hobby that I'm into. Like it's definitely a feedback loop. And we've seen this time and time again.
Now, this sort of becomes obvious once I mention it, right? And this is the bomb, right? It's sort of common sense, but I was at the Met. It's an art museum, right? But they had an exhibit about a book. So what are they going to show there? It's like, it's not paintings, it's not sculptures, it's not, right? It's just a book. So it's like what was in the exhibit, right? Volumes of books and then like text on the walls explaining it, right? It's like, no, the exhibit, the vast majority of it was fucking fan art.
Yeah.
It was ancient people hundreds of years ago doing Genji fan art. They had screens that had Genji scenes painted on them. They had like, these people read this fucking thing, right? And they had all their artists make them Genji musical instruments, Genji, or all Genji, anything, Genji fans, like anything that you could put art on. Genji scrolls, Genji inkstone, right? It's like Genji merch. It was basically Genji merch, right? It was like,
But like the artist alley of Genji merch, like, hey, check out this painting I made about Genji.
Right.
Hey, I tried to recreate when Genji painted on the bamboo screen. Like I tried to make
Genji t-shirts. There were Genji kimonos with like scenes of Genji in the fabric. It was all
the pickup artists of the late Heian era were like trying to be Genji and were like writing poems and like writing them on a little fan and like trying to emulate what they read in that work.
Right. The kids today and there was also fanfics too. Genji fanfics too, right? It's like
there's even debate about some of the later chapters might have been collaborations or written by someone else. Like
there's all this shit that people are doing today, right? Was being done by these nobles hundreds of years ago who those nobles just didn't have as many different, artworks to choose from, right? Whereas
humans aren't that different. Look at Roman graffiti or look at the word okay. Do you know the origin of that word? It's a meme from a couple hundred years ago where people would make acronyms that were incorrect and spelled wrong because they thought it was funny. OK stands for all correct, spelled wrong with a K, and it was a meme from like the 1800s.
Well, I don't know if that's right or wrong, but okay.
I watched a documentary on this not that long ago, so it was fresh in my mind. But is it just memes and pop culture references and like the idle leisures of people who have the privilege to take idle leisures? Not much has changed. And these old works only feel inaccessible because of the distance from that culture. In the same way that even contemporary cultures are very inaccessible to people who don't know about the shibboleths and the details in the context of those cultures.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that stood out very profoundly in the Tale of Genji, because it's the first work I've read in a long time that is from a culture I know very little about.
I don't know much. I didn't know basically anything, right? It's like, my knowledge of, what Japan was like, hundreds of years ago is basically limited, very self-aware of this, right?
Yep.
Is basically viewed through the lens of fictional works like samurai movies, which obviously are no less than 100 years old, right?
And samurai, those movies are set in very different eras of Japan from the Heian era that this is set in.
Exactly.
And that was
even if there's any accuracy to them, because it's sort of like if someone wanted to get, the history of like, the 20th century, the U.S. and was watching The Godfather. It's like, how accurate is this? It's like, that's what watching, we watch Seven Samurai. It's like, okay, well,
yeah, but it was also
Godfather was sort of somewhat at least closer to the time. It was made closer to the time in which the events it portrays would have taken place, whereas samurai movies were made hundreds of years after, well, maybe not necessarily hundreds, depending on which era of Japan they were making the movie about, but quite many more decades between the movie and the events, the fictional events would have taken place.
But what is interesting is that it feels like the Tale of Genji feels very true to many of the broad cultural strokes of that era, even though the specific events in this book are clearly fictionalized and exaggerated.
Right, because this book, unlike Godfather, right, Seven Samurai, this book was made in the era of which it is portraying. Like if I wrote a book today about the 21st century.
Yep.
Right.
What if I wrote a book about like being a podcaster during this era? Like I work in a tech company, I got some money, this is how I spend my day. There's a bunch of chapters about Overwatch because I play it all the time.
Yeah.
You and I make
mentioned this in
references
the
to
last
tribes.
episode also, right, is that we don't know their real name, but we know that the author was the daughter of like some regional governor, right? Not like not like, hanging out with the emperor, but like, a noble person, not a peasant, right? Someone who obviously was literate, had access to paper and ink and, all kinds of things. And this not only tells you about the time, but also about the perspective of a person in that position at that time. You're seeing, the world through that person's eyes. They can only write what they know, right? And I talked about how, that's, I think, my guess as to the reason why you don't see a lot of things written about like what was going on with, wars or politics or peasants or commerce, because this person who wrote that wasn't engaging in those things and they didn't know about them. Right? They were hanging out, playing music, writing poetry, et cetera, et cetera. So, having romance. That's what they wrote about.
But also, they wrote in a way which may be a reflection of the reality of the time, may be a romanticization of the reality of the time, or may have been a pointed avoidance of difficult topics. But this was published contemporarily. Like, it wasn't like this was an insider account.
They wrote it, and then nobles read it. So they
see also like Shakespeare. Shakespeare couldn't just be like, yes, this king in particular, fuck him.
Yeah, Shakespeare didn't go to the Globe Theater and be like, fuck the current king. Paying for this.
So he read a lot of stories like, oh yeah, that past king was no good because he's not in favor with the current royalty. So it's hard for me, as someone who doesn't know much about Heian era, to know like how much of this might have been her avoiding these topics. But it seems like a lot of this writing was during a relatively stable and peaceful era of the Heian court.
Except as the story goes on, it seems like, and I noticed this pattern in lots and lots of fictional works of the greatest, most prosperous, wonderful times, I guess there's people who feel this way too, right, are always the oldest times. And in this book, it's actually interesting, and that the prosperous times are actually the beginning of the book.
It's the current times right up until Genji gets a little older, and then it's the evil times where the government is getting more austere, and like there's political troubles that are never described specifically at any point.
Right. But, something like Lord of the Rings, it's like things used to be fucking crazy good. And then you're reading, but the story takes place in, the third era or whatever, right? Where things are not as awesome. It's like, King Arthur. It's like, okay, I guess King Arthur does get to the good times, but then the not so good, right?
Yeah.
It's always a downslope. I very rarely read, I'm sure they exist.
Culture. Every day forward into the future in the culture books.
It's awesome. And then down. It's just a downward slope. It doesn't get great.
Of course, arguably, the later movies point out that the Old Republic sucked and had deep problems.
In some ways it sucked, but in some ways not.
But look at the culture books. Literally, every year that goes by, everything is better.
Well, culture, I guess, would be the exception.
And the old times are terrible.
I guess, culture is the backwards one.
A lot of optimistic sci-fi is like that. It's always like we've come out of a dark age and we're entering an enlightened age.
Yeah.
But it's very telling that the Tale of Genji, and that's where I don't know how much of that was a reaction to maybe shifts in the author's life or things the author noticed, how much of it might have been just
them just getting old, because as people get old, right, we see people just in our lives, which are half over, right? Like conservative people are always like, the old days, right? The old
I'm not. I look at Counter-Strike 1.6 and I think, thank Satan, there is Counter-Strike Go.
But I think there is a general, wrong feeling of, the good old days, right? Amongst people, all over the place. It's not, some...
But another way to look at this, because I don't want to remove literary agency from the author, because the story... Everything feels great when Genji's young and doesn't have any responsibilities or problems or consequences. But then the story gets more melancholy and complex as Genji is an adult and has to deal with complications. So that also, it fits the story of Genji growing up and seeing the world from increasingly broader perspectives. So
even if the world stays the same, right? Getting older kind of sucks. Right?
I mean, I just turned 40 and I got to tell you, 40 ain't 30 and 30 ain't 20 in terms of certain physical parts of my body. Looking at you, left
29.
knee.
Right.
Left knee, you've betrayed me for the last time.
Especially people didn't live that long in this era.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look at these emperors like, oh, no, he's 40. Yeah, he's going to die any day. Good Lord.
Yep. Well, they didn't have medical science that we had, you know.
Yeah. But in terms of that meta, too, it's interesting to see how radically differently, at least the translation we read, the book is structured differently as it goes on. Chapters are written differently, and that's something we pointedly avoided talking about in the first half of the show. Pick any random chapter from after Genji dies, and it is just absolutely... I skimmed through one again before the show just to make sure I wasn't just, those are the ones I read most recently. No, it's like night and day. The later chapters, to a modern audience, are just easier to read. Full stop. They have more structure. They tell you more about what's happening. A section will end, and the next section just, either picks up where the last one left off, or explains the setting change. Like, now we're in this other place, and here's what this person's up to. The first chapters would just, you'd have two characters talking, and then suddenly... two different characters are talking, and you're not sure if they're in the same place or not. And sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't.
I highlighted a part. I looked through my Kindle for just the few parts that I highlighted when I was reading. And there's literally a sentence in one of the middle chapters that's like, and the years went on such and such. And it was just one sentence at the beginning of a paragraph, right? And there's a footnote attached to that sentence. And the footnote says... this sentence covers a period of 4 years, right? It's like and also I think I did mention there's like a paragraph where it's like, oh yeah, an emperor died, another emperor took over, and someone else died, and it was like that was in the middle of a paragraph.
Yep, I'm back at wait, which emperor? The current emperor? Who's emperor now?
Right. It's like, but meanwhile, when another character, when Murasaki, right, the author's character dies, that's a whole fucking chapter. It's like just right for that. So it's like it's all these different, the time scales just keep getting out of whack. But after Genji dies, the rest of the book has sort of a steady pace of things, right? It's like this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then right? It's not just an artifact of the translator doing something different for those chapters. It's like this. They really are.
There is more context as to where and
there's fewer characters, right? There's less moving all over the place, right? Things are happening always in chronological order. You don't have the overlapping stuff going on anymore.
Yep. The characters are a little simpler too. Like the characters
aren't changing their roles too much. You always know who's who.
Yep. And I wonder,
character, they have these, it's only dealing with one plot, right? So it's like you can follow, the characters pretty much have the same motivations and goals throughout the rest of the book.
But it really feels like the early chapters are very disconnected from each other in that they're almost like, let's have a story where Genji has this kind of affair. All right, let's have this kind of affair. And consequences are not tied together or they don't progress anything other than Genji's development. And they're very standalone. But also it almost reads like that's just what would have happened, which is a thing that a lot of, in modern sensibilities, contemporary today, that's often the sign of a less apt writer, like a George R. R. Martin, I'm just going to, that wasn't a good story, what just happened there, but that's logically what would have happened. That's what that character would have done. The later chapters...
I don't see the author as a not good author.
No.
I see the author as, it's like if you just watch old Olympics and it's like you watch the high jump gold medalist and it's like that was the highest jumper in the world at the time, right? They couldn't jump very high compared to how we jump today. That's because it was 100 years ago, right? They couldn't jump that high then. They didn't know how.
Watch a sitcom.
Athletic training and all the things that we have.
Watch a sitcom, so one episode.
This person didn't have Shakespeare to read, right? Shakespeare had other things to learn from, and then other people had Shakespeare to learn from, right? But, Murasaki Shikibu, what did they have, right? They had Chinese literature, the poems, right? It's like there wasn't a whole bookstore full of novels that this woman could read to learn to be a better writer from.
But look at the craft, the craft of media has changed so much. Because right now I'm watching a bunch of Star Trek. So I'm watching old Star Trek and new Star Trek, and it's very stark to look at TV shows from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and like how they were constructed, they feel very poorly put together. The scripts don't feel that good. There's a lot of downtime and sort of dead ends, and just the craft wasn't there yet, and the craft has evolved. Modern entertainment, a couple decades later, is denser. The stories are tighter. They're more focused. Like, audiences change, but also the craft advances. So
but not only does it advance over a long period of multiple people, right? But you could see, even with, if you just forget the post Genji's death chapters, right? You can see it advance within right? The same way when you look at something like a webcomic and you see the oldest strips are like are way back.
I was about to say, I just looked at a Penny Arcade from 22 years ago when Gabe proposed.
Right. And it's like you can see the artist improving their art just because they're doing it, right? The author of the Tale of Genji gets better at writing as the chapters go on.
Absolutely.
It's not, I thought, it was hard to tell because I was like, am I just getting better at reading this book? Right?
No, go back to an early chapter. I still don't know what happened sometimes.
Right. It's like, that is a part of it. You do get better at reading it, as you go on and push through. But no, the early chapters are written way worse, way harder to follow. It can't just be the translator getting better at translating, because they clearly edited and went through how many times, right? They spent their whole life studying the book. I don't feel like they put more effort into translating the later chapters than the earlier ones. Right?
But like around when Genji gets exiled and then comes back, and like the second phase, I guess, of the three,
very
like
hard to follow what's going on around there. Yeah.
Yeah, but right after that, it just gets easier and easier to follow.
Yep.
But that third set of chapters.
Yeah.
What it struck me the most about the third part, like after Genji's death, is that the characters felt faker, but were easier to understand, and their relationships felt very planned in advance in a way that it didn't feel to the reader, to me at least, in the early chapters, that there was a plan for exactly how this was going to go down. Like, she was writing this almost chapter by chapter, but the later chapters feel like this was designed to wrap itself up in a particular way. This character is going to be here to serve this purpose in the plot, as opposed to, this is a character that would make sense to be there based on what I'm writing about. I don't know if that was her motivation, but that stood out to me as a reader.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of debates about who wrote what, and because we don't know for sure any of these sorts of things.
Yeah, this is from the 1200s. Like, this is a long time ago.
But my personal head canon, right, is that she started writing this thing.
Yep.
Just
maybe
like
for fun, like spreading among her friends.
Wrote like a chapter or two about this awesome dude Genji, right?
Hey, you want to read about the hottest goddamn person to ever be born? Well, I got a story for you.
Right. So wrote like a chapter or two, and then people were into it, right? And it's like, oh, well, I got nothing else to do, right? I'm doing this. I'll keep doing it. And then there was demand for it now. So there was like pressure to like deliver on this.
Imagine even if it was just the court at first. Like we start doing Geek Nights. Then some people like, hey, I actually like Geek Nights. Not someone who isn't our friend contacted us once, like, oh, someone's listening. So imagine now the author is like, well, I'm going to start like planning a little more, or writing more, or thinking about what would my audience want to see. I know, I'll have him sleep with the wrong person. That'll be great.
Yep. So, and then as over time they got better at writing, perhaps there were some parts where like they were reluctant to go on, but they went on instead, right? Who knows what was going on in their lives, right? A lot of the things I could imagine a lot of the things I see in the book happening to the author, illnesses or having to move, or all, who knows what, right? All kinds of dramas, incorporating those, probably maybe there could be things in here that we don't even know, like maybe some of the there could be some like chapters that are basically diss tracks against real people that they knew, right? Like the same way that like art musicians will sing songs about their ex, right?
Yep.
There could be some of that shit in here, and you just don't even realize it, that it's going on.
There were a bunch of moments where I would feel like that was true, but I couldn't articulate it.
Right. Like, like they're right, they have a character who's like, portrayed negatively, and it's like, is that character someone they knew and they're portraying them in here?
Like, especially Genji's wife in particular, it felt like, did you know someone who you really didn't like in the cart? Like,
yep. Or you saw a story happen, so you write the story. You take a rumor you heard and write it down with other characters, right? Something like that.
Yep.
But then, so as for the chapters that come after Genji's death, right? It's not like the previous chapters, you see a gradual improvement. It's this sudden jump into a different mode of writing. So obviously other, people have all kinds of explanations. It could be a different author, in which case it's like a fan fiction addendum. It could be, oh, she stopped writing Genji, but we must have more Genji, and the emperor told someone to write more.
Yep.
Right. And you could imagine so many possible explanations. Maybe there was they got tired of Genji and they said that's enough of that, and then they were still alive and they were pressured to write more, but they were so much better at writing by that time that they were able to, but they didn't have enough new ideas, and then therefore they produced those ending chapters, and then they passed away, and that's why it ends.
And
sort of
I did
abruptly.
skim her biography. I'm not gonna like relate everything because go read it yourself or read the Wikipedia page. But one thing that was very clear is most people agree that she published it herself with her own ladies in waiting to a small audience, almost like a zine at first. And it got popular, and eventually patrons started to like fund it, and it grew from there.
Yep.
Which that's how webcomics happen today. Like almost directly. Like someone makes a webcomic, costs some money.
1,200 something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But let's see, what other meta can I think of around the Tale of Genji that we didn't talk about in the first episode? Trying to avoid talking about Genji and the characters again. But the thing that just stood out the most was how much easier those later chapters were to read and how tighter they felt.
Yeah. I guess we got, I guess you can talk about, I don't know too much about, right, what it was like, the history of what was going on in that era.
My knowledge of Heian era is that it was a deeply dysfunctional and extremely divided Japanese society where the nobles really didn't interact with normal people at all. And I
mean, that's what it seems like in the book. And I think the number one thing that just like stood out the most in the book was, how women were so like cloistered and secluded, and like, we talk about objectification of women in today's society, right? It's like literally, it's like you owned some women, right? It's like there wasn't any woman that didn't belong to somebody, right?
Well, when there's a woman living on her own, it happens a few times in the Tale of Genji. It's always a like, yeah, who's paying her bills? Like, what's going on? They're living in this decrepit house somewhere because there's no man around.
Yeah, who's taking? I need to make sure all my daughters are taking, belong to someone. I'm gonna die, right? I have to make sure that each one has some man to take care of them, and like. You can't let anyone, like, you talk about modesty, like, Victorian or whatever, right? Like, can't show any ankles and whatnot. This is like, you cannot let anyone see you unless, like, they're your, like, father, maybe not even your brother, unless you're a child, right? It's like, once you're, I guess the donning of the train maybe that comes up a few times in the book. I assume that's some sort of adult becoming ceremony. I didn't research it. But it's like, it's like once you're an adult woman, it's like nobody sees you except your staff, your like your parents, right? Your children, your spouse. It's like you are hidden behind walls, right? And that really struck me because even if you watch, all sorts of, samurai movies and stuff, right? It's like, the women aren't, they're hidden and protected, but not that level, right? It's like you'll still see scenes where like someone's bowing before, the empress who's sitting there getting mad or something, right? Whereas here, it's like in this time, clearly the empress would be behind some wall and you wouldn't even know. It's like you only know that they're there because
But what I do find interesting is this book portrays the rich inner lives of what is happening behind those walls, and it shows like the interactions that actually happen. Like there's a the men they're all hanging out together in the early part of the Tale of Genji, but you always see the echoes of the women behind that screen are all hanging out together and doing their own thing. And it's interesting to see that portrayed so directly.
Mm-hmm.
So the other things I know about the Han era just personally, and again, I'm probably radically overgeneralizing, is that government was extremely incompetent and got more and more incompetent and incapable of running the country as time went on.
Mm-hmm.
That's a common trope I've seen. Like, currency started to fall apart, like banking institutions collapsed, rice became the primary unit of exchange. I pulled up the Wikipedia. Oh God, yeah, right here. The money circulation fell apart. Rice became literally the primary unit of exchange. Yep, the reason they were giving gifts to each other so much, largely because there wasn't any other way to transfer value and transfer wealth. So remember,
in the book, throughout the book, they were constantly gifting things to each other.
But remember when Genji goes into exile? Like, he's wealthy, and he stops at a bunch of his storehouses. His wealth is big warehouses he owns filled with his shit. And he goes and, like, gets stuff from those warehouses to bring with him to give to people as gifts to pay them, basically.
Yeah, everywhere they go, they're constantly gifting, right?
Yep.
Here, have some, there's a ceremony. They gave everyone gifts, and whoever danced the best got the best gift. It's like,
yep. But that was partly because there really wasn't a currency to trade. You couldn't give someone a tip.
I guess. There's also, the book also talks a lot about, these really small details, I guess in modern times, we talk about it like appreciating the little things in life. But there's a lot of text in this book dedicated to going to extreme detail about the little things in life, right? Like, they're constantly perfuming things themselves, papers, right? Because it's just like there isn't that much sensory entertainment. There's no VR, right? So it's like perfuming things, looking at flowers.
They talk a lot about, oh shit, that's the good colored paper. Oh, goddamn.
Right. It's like they go to look at flowers the way that you would go to Disney World. It's like all this kind of stuff, right? These things that we would consider like simple pleasures are like big pleasures.
So I found a historical statistic that really puts this into light. The aristocracy, the people portrayed in the Tale of Genji, are referred to contemporarily by a Japanese word that basically means the good people. And there were about 5,000 of them total in a nation of around 5 to 6 million. And
right, yeah.
And so 5,000 extremely wealthy people playing games and singing and living in this cloistered existence, and 5 or 6 million people living in desperate poverty around them.
Yeah, the book pretty much never talks about the people living in the poverty.
Remember way back I kept talking about that one scene with normal dialogue? That never happens again in the book. You never have a normal person say words other than that one scene in like chapter 5.
And it even seems like, it's like, okay, you've got like, the Empress, and the Empress has, women around her. But those women don't seem like they're peasants, right? Those women are like, yes, some merchant's daughter was sent to the palace to, right?
Yep.
Like, they're like they're sending each other's like, some of their children, right, who end up not being, so high ranking, are sent to work for someone. It's like, those are still like noble people. They're just lower ranked noble people. Like the actual peasant people, like planting rice, doing actual hard labor people are like not even present here.
All I can think of, there's a song in Centaur World, please, sir, tell me where food comes from. Like that song. It's But the other thing that I see just skimming this around that era that came up a lot in the Tale of Genji, they talk a lot about how difficult and dangerous travel is. Like, or your fence being broken is a big deal. Like, if your fence is not able to be sealed. They basically let the police forces completely collapse, and there were just robbers and brigands anywhere outside of the walled cities and outside of the walled estates.
And they're always traveling like in like a wagon, like basically a thing with 2 wheels that someone's pulling. Right?
Usually with a big entourage and armed guards and like heralds.
It's similar to Oregon Trail, only humans are pulling instead of oxen.
Yep.
Right? Or like a like, what's it called? Where people just pick you right the fuck up, right?
Yeah.
What I forget what those are called, Palanquin, whatever.
Or palanquins.
Yeah, it's something like that, right? People just pick you up and carry you through the street. But yeah, they always travel, right? Like with people, right? No one's just going.
Well, the book say it's very clear because a few times Genji goes off by himself or mostly by himself in disguise.
He goes mostly by himself. He's like only with his trusted like 5 dudes.
Yeah, that's what I was about to get at. Genji going off like surreptitiously is still this giant like entourage. They're just wearing what I imagine are flimsy disguises and nobody's fooled. Like,
well, I think it's more like if he's only traveling with 5 or 10 dudes, he must be a lower ranked.
yeah,
You're like almost the emperor, right? You're pretty close, right? The emperor would come out with like a fucking army, right?
It's like Monty Python. How do you know he's a king? He hasn't got shit all over him.
Right, exactly. But, so it's like, okay, well, normally when you come out with 100 dudes. So you come out with 5 dudes, and that's your disguise as a lower ranked person so then maybe people, you still got guards, but you wouldn't go out by yourself because people would be like, hey, there's someone who hasn't got shit all over him all by themselves. Let's fucking rob them.
Yep. And it's telling because, there's like Genji sneaks away with that girl early on and they just go to there's a lot of abandoned structures and abandoned estates all over the place. Like you feel that in the books. And skimming
some of them, like become abandoned, right? And you can see that like in the story, it's like, a family was here and then a dude died or a dude moved or someone got married.
Yep.
Right? And just the way that the families and the hierarchy is structured and shifts, it's like, the great, even, the Rokujo, right? Genji's house on the 6th Street, right? The Rokujo, which is like the big, like central location of the majority of the book where most of the action is. It's like it had its heyday when Genji was there with all his wives. And then, people are still there. But after Genji dies, you can tell, even though it doesn't come up in the story very much, that place like declines, because there's not really, there's no Genji, no great person living there anymore. There's like the remnants of Genji's family living there, right? And as they move out or marry other people or die, it's like that place goes, downhill. And if it's not upkept, then and there's not a lot of staff working there, then who the hell wants to live there?
Yeah.
Right? You would need to wait for it to be like completely empty, and then for someone to need a new house to go in there and take it and refreshen it, someone with a lot of power and money and whatnot.
And that's kind of how the Han era eventually ended, is the nobility was so rich and so disconnected that basically what little military they maintained, like people like Genji, who ostensibly was a captain of the guard or whatever at one point.
Yeah, a lot of the people have military titles, the whatever of war,
yeah,
right? All these people.
But it was an era of mostly peace.
You never see the only military stuff you see will be like for entertainment, like boat archery competitions or horse riding.
So basically later on, like post when the Tale of Genji was set, the people who were actually doing the military work kind of just took over because no one could stop them. But it's interesting to read this from the perspective of we're seeing like this narrow glimpse into, and by some arguments, the height of Heian culture, like the most peaceful era right before it collapsed. Like it didn't last that much longer after the era that was portrayed. But at the same time, we're seeing the height only from the perspective of the people who were living the best, wealthiest lives within what was otherwise an extremely broken society. Very similar to many times throughout history, including our own time right now.
Yeah, but it's like even though these people were like the extremely wealthy 1%, there's, at least in the book, there's no depiction of them doing like incredibly cruel things.
No,
right?
They're just doing nothing.
Right.
Like the outside world just doesn't exist.
Right. It's like they're living a life of leisure, right? And, enjoying wondrous arts, right? Some of them are very religious, right? And they actually give up worldly things, and
that was a theme in Heian era too, especially as Buddhism started to become popular among the nobles. Then you'd see a lot of that. There were a bunch of emperors who were like, fuck it, I'm a monk now. You're on your own. Good luck. Have fun.
Yeah, a lot of women want to become, nuns.
Well, you saw that in Europe. A lot of women, if you look at like different parts of European society in different eras in the medieval times, yeah, I can live this horrible life and marry that shitbag, or I can go join a nunnery and escape all that. A lot of people would choose the nunnery.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even Genji's groomed wife.
Part, being like even a Christian monk, right?
Yeah.
It's like that's kind of it's kind of cool, except for the Christian part.
Well, it's also a way to escape the actual violent reality of the society outside of that institution.
Yeah, I think that's what's appealing. If I think about becoming, some sort of religious monk, right? It's like the religious part isn't the appealing part. The escape capitalism is the appealing part. It's like the one way to escape capitalism is to win at it. Right? Get so much money, you don't have to do anything anymore. But another way is like, yeah, there's some organization like a church or whatever, or even though you're living an ascetic life of some kind, it's still a life. It's not, it's not the worst, right? It's not like homeless, absolute destitution. And if you can enjoy the smaller things in life, nice smells and tasty foods and whatnot, like Belgian monks making delicious beers, which I don't even like, right? Stuff like that. It's like that can be a fulfilling life, and if you have the opportunity to do it, then it could be a good choice, even if you're an extremely wealthy emperor, right? That could be an appealing choice. Get away from all this fucking drama in this palace, right?
Yep.
It's like,
or avoid getting married off to some just rando.
Right, exactly. Some dude you hate who's just going to treat you like property, But if you're a peasant, you probably don't even have the opportunity to go become a monk,
Yep.
It's
Well,
like
even when he's living in exile, there's that family, and they're like, "Oh, we gotta hook our daughter up with Genji because this is like the richest person who's ever gonna come to this town again."
Yeah. All right. Is there anything else to say about this book? I guess we're never gonna have to talk about it again on this show.
Nope. I'm glad we read it. Like, I enjoyed reading it.
It's not like my favorite book, but I guess I was disappointed in that there's not actually. I haven't encountered as many references to it as I expected in other works.
It's good to know about it though. Like, not every GeekNights Book Club book is going to be like a bat 1,000 hit with us. This was.
I did learn a lot. I did learn a lot of things.
I got interested. I actually got interested enough in Heian era history to start reading like high level. Like, it's an era I'd like to know more about, but I'm not gonna become an expert on it. But I want to have a working knowledge of that era, which I did not have in any capacity before I read this book, and I'm close to having like a very broad strokes, like I would have about Europe during that time knowledge.
But right. But my secondary reason, right, my primary reason of trying to get more, literary references between things, right, didn't really pan out so much. But my secondary reason of drawing parallels between, the people of today and the people of then in terms of media culture and also, the form of the novel, parallels between current novels and the original novel, right? As I think that I batted 1,000 on, right? It's just so, right? It's like you can see exactly where it's like, oh, that.
No, I have an example. Like I mentioned that Star Trek thing
years ago.
The reason I mentioned it.
This is what counts as a novel today, and you can see exactly how they line up.
Yeah, but I mentioned the Star Trek stuff because I'm watching a lot of older media lately, and I'm really it really stands out the differences in like the craft over time, but it also stands out that older media has the same fundamental truths because humans have the same fundamental interests when not subverted by situation, circumstance, capitalism, etc.
Yep. Even in this completely different culture, completely different language, completely different circumstances.
They're passing memes around and enjoying music and trying to escape capitalism.
The humans are still humaning. Right? They didn't have capitalism. Wasn't invented yet. Right? But it's like they still have all these things that are just innately human that we can see the same motivations. We see jealousy. We see, all these same things that we see today, fan art.
Well, thus, the act of making an increasingly distant from current culture Simpsons reference is in fact echoing the Tale of Genji, and therefore I will continue to do this. And when I'm 90 and I reference the Simpsons, and the kids have no idea what I'm talking about.
That's no different than someone in the than this author referencing some Chinese poem that everyone at that time who was noble would know about. In the Tale of Genji.
I can't say how many times in the Tale of Genji I would read like a short section, like one quote paragraph, and it would get this feeling of, this is a joke I don't get. This is referencing something I don't get. This is clearly intended to be a joke.
The footnote tells you, yes, this is a reference to, because they would make an analogy like, you smell like the something, and it's like, what's the something? Oh, it's a reference to this other poem,
but not every
something was X.
Not every passage that gave me that feeling had a footnote, because I wonder, it's been a long time since this was written. How many references might be embedded in the text that aren't recognizable?
That's true. Or how many?
I mean, I literally
became references themselves.
Exactly. But at work a few weeks ago, I made a Simpsons reference, like kind of casually as part of a conversation.
Which one?
Oh, it was actually, it wasn't Two Knives, but it was a Mo Sizlak. It was, I was just going to cut you a little.
Oh, I was going to just cut you a little bit.
Yeah. Like, no, I wasn't going to cut you because I was like, I'm going to cut you a little bit. And like the guy laughed, but later we were talking and he was like, and it was very clear that he thought I had made a joke on my own from nothing. Like, I was like, no, that was just a reference to The Simpsons. Like, I'm not that funny. And it sparked an interesting conversation with someone who's 20 years younger than me that just made me feel terrifyingly old.
It's like, you have not watched every Simpsons and Seinfeld episode ever? No. Right? It's like, but
that's a shame.
Was there some noble 100 years, I guess not even 100, a few decades after the Tale of Genji was no longer a big hit, who hadn't read all of the Tale of Genji, and then was missing references from Grandpa, dropping poems.
But does the Tale of Genji itself have references that were just missed by translators and lost to time?
I don't know.
Someday will people not remember the treasure of the Sierra Madre?
There could definitely be some, but the fact that these translators, right, have these are people who spent their whole lives studying this one fucking book.
I feel like there aren't many. But I feel like it's still possible just due to the distance of time.
Anyway, that's the end of Genji's tale, at least as far as our lives are concerned.
Yep, so I'm going to make the post. It is official now. The book club book, which we will do soon. We're just going to give you some time to read it.
Finished reading this book
weeks
ago.
The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. It's a GeekNights book, and I think you're going to like it, and we're going to do a show on it.
It's got a real big drop, right? The beat drops close to the end.
We'll do it in about a month at most.
Best way.
Because it will not take you long to read this. Like,
I didn't take long at all. But we have, for once, you had to wait for us to read. Now we're going to wait for you to read. We'll give you a month or two.
Yep. I feel like I'm going to have this book done before the end of February, but we'll still wait like a couple weeks after that, and then we'll do the show. Or we'll record it in advance, but we're going to publish it after a month. So
that's not a bad idea.
It's not a bad idea at all. Get ahead on the book club a little bit.
Maybe we could put something like, on the internet and have like people can come and check the box like when they finish reading it, and then we can sort of track when it hits a certain amount.
Yeah. Well, I think now that we're rekindling the book club with a new book, we know that people will start reading the book around this time. So we can talk about the book in the forum and the Discord while we're all reading it together. That used to happen with all the other book club books. It only didn't happen with the Tale of Genji because you know exactly why.
Let us know if you plan on reading The City We Became, and let us know when you finish reading it.
Yep.
And such. So.
And we'll plan around that, and also we can talk about the book in the forum and the Discord while we're all reading it. Just obviously don't spoiler people without tags and usual internet curation of content.
Yeah.
All right, we